Good evening. Welcome to the show. Around the Nation right here. Jeff Waldorf here with you today. Got a great show for you guys today, so thanks for tuning in. We're going to have a little bit of fun with Tauntauns in Congress. Oh, you're going to love that video because of how ridiculous it is, and plus, you guys know I'm a dork, so... Unfortunately, though, it might have actually ruined for Star Wars in Congress. So we'll get to that story. You'll love it. Then we have, first, we do have Donald Trump, a little bit of inside baseball to his reaction from the not total and complete exoneration from the Mueller report. Interesting. Then, of course, we have Sarah Huckabee Sanders tweeting out something ridiculous and social media destroying her for it. That's fun. Bad news for the ACA. Republicans are coming at it after it once more. They have not stopped, and this time led by the Trump administration. Then we have that Star Wars story, which is fun, and then disaster for the climate. So, oh boy, here we go again. So, that's sort of the lineup that we have today. First, let me thank some patrons, patreon.com/TYTNation. I want to give a shout out to Robert Butler, FYI Nation, Lisa Hammond, Kimberly Buckley, Kenyon Bunny, Richard Magnetson, Sam Schaefer, Jeffrey Johnson, Sammy Osborne, and Martin Trammell. So thank you to all of those who have signed up to become patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That's how you can support independent progressive media. So thank you for that. No new memberships as well. And then, thank you, Eric Zetterland. So I'm reading comments right now. Let's see. I need to talk about the events in the UN Security Council meeting. I have not paid attention to that. So I apologize for that. But normally I don't really focus on like world events, stuff like that, but I'll read up on it. Okay, anyway, I do take comments and questions and stuff during the show, so I do read those, and if you want to send me comments that are, hey, super chats are great, but I'll also read non-super chats as well, just to make sure you guys, are heard. All right, anyway, one thing that I don't have a story for is Jussie Smollett. So, apparently Jussie Smollett has had all the charges dropped. Now, I didn't talk about that when the story broke. I might have made a passing reference to it because it was like, well, it seemed like that was like the perfect storm. Apparently, I guess according to them, not so much. I don't really know all the details to that, but that is really strange. But hey, I guess it's good for him, and there's that. All right, let's get into the stories. We'll start out with Trump's not complete and total exoneration, but mostly, and how he's mad. Even though he won, he's mad. Okay. Well, we'll have fun with that. Okay. So President Trump was given a very big victory on Russiagate. The Mueller report found absolutely no evidence of collusion with the Russian government's effort to interfere in the 2016 election. And while he is publicly celebrating by yelling, "No collusion!" because, well, they didn't find collusion. In private, part of Mueller's report did bother him. Now, this is according to a report from Axios that reveals that the president was initially upset that Attorney General William Barr revealed that Special Counsel Robert Mueller did not exonerate him from obstruction of justice. So now, according to the report, Trump was apparently frustrated after seeing cable news chyrons that emphasized that Mueller did not completely clear Trump of obstruction in his report on Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. One source told Axios, "The media chyrons and outlets all jumped on that as a sign of more to come, / the case not being tied up with a bow." Now, look, they continued with that by saying, which is why he's pushing the complete and total exoneration line. his initial reaction was angry over the coverage that line got. Can you just, like, take this for a win that it is? No collusion. Look, it's very obvious that he did try to obstruct the investigation. But nothing will come of it. But now you're mad about the TV coverage. Oh, it's not complete and total exoneration. I'm so mad. And look, the whole thing, again, super absurd. We saw him on live TV admitting that he fired James Comey because he didn't like the Russia investigation. The Russia thing, right? Then, of course, he backpedaled, concocted a crazy story about protecting Hillary Clinton. And are you kidding me? No, you're the guy who was at your rallies. Lock her up, lock her. Do you guys remember that? Any of that? I mean, come on, man. Oh, no, we were protecting Hillary Clinton from James Comey because we think James Comey was super unfair to Hillary Clinton. That's why I fired him. And then he did a bad job. And then, well, first it's a Russia thing, then it's a bad job, and then protecting Hillary Clinton. Nobody bought any of that. Nobody. So now, why? Why is it not obstruction of justice? It may be a bit of a technicality. Fortunately for him, the investigation focused on collusion instead of the other things that he might have actually done. And here's the thing, my speculation of why he hated the investigation so much. They're going to get into his finances and maybe uncover some of the other shady things that he might have done. I'm just saying. Look, he hates being investigated for any reason because it turns out when you're a criminal, you don't like investigations. I know, super weird, right? But they focused on collusion instead of money laundering, tax fraud, bank fraud. Look, we know in a recent report, thanks to people, working at Deutsche Bank, who are now cooperating with other investigations into Trump and his finances, we know that he inflated his net worth of his properties and assets of up to 70% in order to get a new loan from Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank basically loaned him over $2 billion over a series of years. I think a couple of decades around. And again, the loser defaulted on pretty much everything, almost every single loan he was ever given by Deutsche Bank, because he's a terrible businessman. And of course, he had overstated his wealth. So he lied in order to get money. That to me would seem like bank fraud. And ironically, he might have inflated his assets in order to get a loan, but then deflated them when it came to paying taxes. So again, a grifter. Now the Mueller report, as I said before, they only looked at collusion within the confines of the 2016 election. And so that was a very narrow scope that they looked at. And of course, they did not find anything. And as far as obstruction, of course, this was left, basically the decision to go after him for obstruction was left to somebody at the DOJ. Somebody that Trump had appointed, William Barr. So, surprise, surprise, shockingly, William Barr did exactly what he was put there to do. And said, oh, we don't find any evidence of obstruction of justice. He was put there exactly to do just that. He even wrote a memo before being appointed to the Department of Justice, arguing that the president cannot be indicted, a sitting president cannot be indicted for obstruction of justice. He didn't believe in that. So are we at all shocked that this happened? At all. We shouldn't be. Now, nonetheless, Trump gets mad at the media for accurately reporting that he wasn't and completely 100% exonerated of everything. The only thing that calmed him down was the DOJ saying, or his lawyers assuring him that the DOJ will never touch him on obstruction, according to that report. The president talked with his legal team, and they assured him that Barr's decision to personally clear Trump of obstruction charges would be enough to get him over the finish line. See? Barr delivered, and they knew he was going to deliver. Now, the report also claims that Trump has privately complained that former campaign chairman Paul Manafort was treated very, very unfairly, although he has not discussed giving him a presidential pardon yet. To Paul Manafort, he was the only one that wasn't the rat. He's being treated so unfairly. For what? He actually committed crime. He is a literal criminal. And yet, oh no, they're treating him so unfairly. Ridiculous, man. No, Manafort lied to Congress. Manafort pretended to work with prosecutors. He literally worked as a foreign agent, lied to them, and still got away with less prison time than people who smoke pot. Again, ridiculous. And so, look, I don't know if there's going to be a pardon for Manafort. Even though he was one of the only ones that stayed loyal, by the way. I mean, you had George Papadopoulos. He did not stay loyal. Michael Flynn did not stay loyal. Rick Gates, Michael Cohen, definitely. And all these people, turns out they're going to prison for their crimes. But Manafort, well, Manafort also going to prison. But he's the one guy that conceivably the president would put a pardon or give a pardon to. And will he? I don't know. Now, there's a lot of people telling him, don't do it, because it's going to look really, really shady. For example, you have Lindsey Graham, right? He said of pardoning Manafort, quote, I don't think that would be very smart. No. Yeah, but Donald Trump, have you ever known him to do anything that you would consider smart? He's not a smart person. So we'll have to see what happens on that front. If Paul Manafort does end up getting a pardon, maybe not now, but maybe down the road. Who knows? But what we do know about Trump is he does tend to try to reward loyalty. And that's one thing that is very, very important to him. So we'll just have to see. Okay. Moving on. Okay. The White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders is now facing an online backlash after posting a March Madness-style bracket that went after critics of President Trump. Now, this was actually not created by Sarah Huckabee Sanders or the White House, just to be very clear on that. It was actually created by the New York Post. And what she ended up doing is that she ended up tweeting this out. Now, this is Mueller Madness. And basically what it did, and I'll show you a picture of that, is that it featured high-profile cable, print, network, and Twitter personalities who are critics of the president. And so let me show you that right now. Okay, hold on. All right, so that's what it looks like. You've got some names like Rachel Maddow, Anna Navarro, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, Joy Behar, Michael Avenatti. All these, people who are prominently anti-Trump on Twitter. And so it's a bit of a ridiculous graphic. And in the tweet, Huckabee Sanders said, Mueller Madness, which is the angry and hysterical real Donald Trump haters got it most embarrassingly wrong. Hashtag you decide. Now look, did people get it wrong? Yeah. Yeah, look, if you focused 100% on collusion and you thought that the Mueller report was going to be the thing that brings Donald Trump down, then yeah, you got it wrong. So yeah, Rachel Maddow, the Krasenstein brothers, Louise Mensch, I mean, they're just a few, right? So look, I can understand the White House taking a victory lap, right? But at the same time, is it really a good, smart thing in this environment to make a list of all the political opponents of the president? Social media users thought, no, I don't think so. Molly Jong Fast says, quote, this does not seem like a very good use of my tax dollars, Sarah. Now, look, again, this was not created by the White House. It's created by the New York Post. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders is using her time as press secretary to tweet this out. Roland Scahill says, just when you thought you couldn't be more unprofessional. Ryan Medina says, the tweet will come back to haunt her in about 6 to 8 months. However, look, would she be embarrassed if this does? No, it's doubtful because she has no shame. But it gets a little bit more serious. Now, Jim Brunner says, is this the White House distributing an enemies list? That's a good question. For me, it would seem so. Again, at this point, it's kind of dangerous at a time when right-wing domestic terror is at an all-time high. You have fascism ascendant, not just in America, but all over the world. And a president who is deeply corrupt, who happens to have authoritarian tendencies, and has no problems going after his political enemies. And look, I criticized Hillary Clinton for having an enemies list in politics and the media. I think progressives happen to be on that enemies list, proudly so. But I can criticize them for that. I can also criticize the other side for also having an enemies list. Let's not have enemies lists. That'd be great. Sean M. Bird says, this is how our government unites a divided country. How deplorable can they be? How low can you go? No one got it wrong. Well, okay, but again, people did get it wrong. Russiagate. It turns out that they didn't find any evidence that Donald Trump directly worked with the Russians. That's a fact. That is in the report. So, look, it is what it is. Nonetheless, still dangerous. And again, if you want to point out, hey, look, Russian collusion is wrong. That didn't happen. So we were right about that. Ha. Okay, that's fine. Again, this seems a little bit unacceptable. Susan Hennessy says, how is this an acceptable thing for the White House press secretary to tweet out about members of the press and ordinary American citizens? It's almost as if they don't care about people on the other side. That they are, and this is what this is, right? Stochastic terrorism. I know that's a word that keeps going around. And basically, it's putting out the idea that these people are the enemies in the hopes that someone will go after them, someone who is deranged will go after them. That's what the president is actually really good at doing. And so that's why this is dangerous. Now, Jarrett Belleni says, reminder, you are the White House's press secretary. Shauna said, I know you're bored in those long stretches between press briefings, but can't you take up scrapbooking or something? Agreed. Nick Jack Pappas says, Sarah must have a lot of free time only giving press briefings every 40 days. Again, when's the last time she gave a press briefing? She's not at all interested in doing that. Adam Rifkin says, be careful, please. Sarah Sanders has punishable by death on her mind today. And that is responding to a Hill article that notes that she, quote, said, they literally accused the president of the United States of being an agent for a foreign government. That's equivalent to treason. That's punishable by death in this country. Again, that's why it's super, super, scary. Because, again, authoritarian tendencies, I am actually kind of worried now that Trump is emboldened by this and is going on the attack against people he perceives as his political enemies. Now, what I think happened, of course, is that there are a lot of people, Seth Abramson, Luis Mensch, etc., that took this Russian collusion angle, focused heavily on it in order to get clicks, in order to get, money, donations, clicks, people going to their websites, traffic, etc., right? Or just internet fame. I think that's people took that collusion thing and they ran with it instead of focusing on what was actually important, the corruption, the deep, deep corruption in our system, right? And look, the Russians didn't have to work with the president to exploit the divisions in this country. They were already there. and they were easily exploitable. And even so, I've said before, I don't think Russian memes on social media had as big of an impact as these, a lot of these Russia gators believed it did, or were saying that it did. I mean, if you look at, how much money Russian operatives allegedly spent during this election on Facebook ads that were critical of Hillary Clinton, and then you actually look at how much the Clinton campaign spent on those same ads on Facebook in that same medium, the amount that Hillary Clinton spent was vastly larger than the Russians. So who had more influence? Money buys influence, of course. Money buys ads. And if you're arguing who had more influence on the electorate, I would say Hillary Clinton had more influence on the electorate because of how much money and how much she spent. So that's what I believe on that. But back to the tweets here. Pete Souza says this is a sick and disturbing tweet by the White House press secretary. And Kim says, finally, go home, Aunt Lydia. You're drunk. A good reference to the now I'm forgetting the name of that show where she's from. It's right here, but you guys already know what I'm referring to, likely. So, anyway, what do you guys think about the Mueller madness graphic? Do you agree with me? Is it fine, or should the White House be able to use this to gloat over the Mueller investigation conclusion, or does it overstep a line having her tweet this out, going after reporters at a time where Trump basically calls them the enemy of the people? So let me know in the comments, and I look forward to reading them. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a quick break. We will come back. We've got more story for you guys. Stay right here. We've got the Affordable Care Act stuff coming up next. Then we'll have some fun with Photoshop. All right, so stay right here, guys. I'm going to read some comments after the break, and we'll see you in a couple minutes. Round the nation. Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here. Jeff Waldorf here with you. Okay. So I have some comments that I want to read from you guys. And we'll start out with a member comment, a couple from the Searoth, responding to, of course, the story about Sarah Huckabee Sanders, saying that I think the image will cause a bunch of hits on them, basically referring to, hey, there's people that are going to go after now, all these people that are the president's enemies. I'm seeing some other comments that said basically the same thing, where it's like, this is basically an enemies list put into the context. So now that's interesting because they're right. The context of this is here's who the president hates. So these are members of the media, and of course they've been attacked by right wingers. There were, people trying to shoot up offices to, I think we covered one of those before, where somebody had shot up like a news office. So we have right-wing domestic terror. And so when you start pointing people out who are critics of the president and saying, here they are, this is who they are, this is who's against the president, this is who said the president was a traitor and he's working for the Russians, and you should, here you go, who was the most wrong? Some people might look at that and go, calling my president a traitor? Well, we do something about that. That's treason. And, we should do something about that. And that's scary. Then, I've got a couple more comments here. The Searoth again says, I would say that Russia was allowed in because the Citizens United. Partly, yes. I would definitely agree with that. The other way, of course, that we could eliminate all this talk about interference or Russian interference, whatever, is to, end Citizens United, of course, get all the money out of politics. But something additionally that I would love to do is paper ballots. That way we can never have a question of, foreign interference in our election, at least when it comes to voting. Because that's another thing Russiagators, some Russiagators said, oh, the election was stolen from Hillary by the Russians. No, there was social media, sure, and it was an advanced social media campaign, sure. But nobody stole votes. Nobody, there's voter suppression, of course. And I guess if you want to interpret that as stealing votes, but that's Republicans that did that. So, no, good comments. And then finally, I do have another comment from a non-member. Evil Yoda says, ha, you'll never read my comments. Oh, that's awkward. Oops. Okay. Anyway. All right. Let's move on here. Let's go to the ACA. And boom. Now that the Mueller investigation is over, Donald Trump's administration is focusing on policy, or at least focusing on eliminating policy. Now, the president is now actually taking aim again at the Affordable Care Act. Now, this is following a court ruling that said that the removal of the individual mandate actually makes the law unconstitutional. And since that court decision, the Department of Justice is now basically trying to use that to get the whole law scrapped. Now, that would mean, of course, what little we have gotten from the ACA in progress would be gone. That means protections for pre-existing conditions, tax credits for lower and middle class insurance buyers, expanded state Medicaid programs to the poor, gone. All that. What good the ACA brought us, and it did bring us some good, would be eliminated. Well, of course. Now, to show how bad this would be, Nicholas Bagley, University of Michigan law professor and expert on the healthcare law, wrote an article at the Incidental Economist that said basically, quote, the notion that you could gut the entire ACA and not wreak havoc on the lives of millions of people is insane. I would agree with that. They said the ACA is now part of the plumbing of the healthcare system. Now, some of you might be saying, but Jeff, if you're against that, then how can you argue in favor of a single-payer system? That will also destroy private insurance. It'll destroy our system. Now, first off, if you're making that assertion, then you are false. Because, and the reason I bring that up, of course, is that there are some people that are actually making that. That have made that argument against single payer. Oh, but it would end private insurance, and then it would just throw millions of people off insurance right now. Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton have actually made that argument before. So they actually made that in debates against Bernie Sanders. And so it is there, and that's why I bring it up. Now, to answer that question, no, it wouldn't throw millions of people off health insurance. It would actually have a phase-in period where more people would be enrolled into the existing Medicare program, and benefits in that program would be expanded, right? Now, it wouldn't institute a completely new system. We already have Medicare. It would add people to a program that is already wildly successful and wildly popular. So there is no, complete chaos and everybody losing their coverage. Now, the Trump plan, however, to do this, it would be chaos. It would do exactly that. He would be ripping out the current system that was built up over the years and not replacing it. Which, of course, was the plan all along. Now, Republicans, they since the ACA was even passed, Republicans have been like, I'm against Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. We got to destroy Obamacare. We got to repeal Obamacare. And then what? Now, they didn't expect that it would actually work and help get Trump elected. So when that happened, they were in a position where it's like, oh no, we actually got put into power. Now what do? We got to come up with a plan. We got to come up with a plan. We got to replace the ACA. So what do? Let's find an even more right-wing plan, than the ACA. Which again, I got to go back to pointing out that it's a Heritage Foundation plan put into place in Massachusetts by Mitt Romney. So let's be fair, right? That's what it is, and of course, again, conservative plan, very market-based, and the only, public part of it would be to expand Medicaid. And yet Republicans are like, well, we have to go to the right of this thing. And so that's what's going on. Now, they put up their plan, and it massively failed. They were not able to repeal the ACA. They were not able to pass their own healthcare plan because it was deeply unpopular. And so, after that happened, the administration said, well, we can't get rid of the healthcare law, but what we can do is we can use our regulatory authority to undermine that law. Well, so it's exactly what they tried to do. And in the summer of 2018, the administration decided to back a lawsuit against the Affordable Care Act that basically meant to destroy the underpinning, right? And now, what's interesting about that is that is not traditionally the position taken by the executive branch. Normally, the executive branch defends federal statutes in court, even those the president might personally oppose. But in this case, the president and the Republican Party, they don't care about precedent. They don't care about norms. They want this law gone. They want the ACA stricken from the books, scrubbed from history. And President Trump specifically wants it gone because it is President Obama's chief signature legislation. Now, luckily for the people that still do rely on the ACA, it's not going to be easy for them. Now, right now, it's currently before the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. If it gets past the Fifth Circuit, it would go before the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has already turned away two major challenges to the ACA, some of which are more serious than this. So it's not likely to get taken up, but at the same time, who knows anymore? I don't. So, look, for me, this is why I'm against half measures. I mean, the ACA was a half measure. And I'm being super generous. Because in reality, a real half measure would have had a public option, which we did not get thanks to so-called moderate Democrats who get money from health insurance companies for their elections. That's legalized bribery, right? Now, in 2018, 2019, right, the Democrats have finally caught up for the Center of American Progress saying, oh, we're going to do the Medicare extra whatever for all. That's basically a public option. It's a Medicare buy-in that keeps private insurance. Wow, you have caught up to where I was back in 2011. Congratulations, Democratic Party. I mean, come on, man. And look, as much as the ACA has helped, I benefited personally from it. I know a lot of people who have. It was always a Band-Aid. It was always very convoluted, complicated, and contrived. And it relied on so many different pieces working together, right, to be effective. And when you have something that complicated, it's pretty easy to break apart, as Republicans have shown. Like the ruling, for example, that made Medicaid expansion optional for the states. Well, that hurt a lot of people in red states who could not get access to Medicaid. And of course, you have the mandate. And of course, you also had the subsidies that President Trump has tried to roll back as well. And then you have the companies themselves, which have left a lot of these marketplace exchanges, making them either a monopoly or incredibly expensive, leaving with people very, very few choices on the exchange at all. The ACA, as it stands right now, is a mess. And unfortunately, for some of the Democrats who are like, no, I'm going to support and fix the ACA. You can't fix this. You can't fix it, but you also can't eliminate what little people have right now. So what's my solution? Well, it's the same as it's always been. Medicare for all. Open it up. Get people enrolled in Medicare. And once everybody's there, you can finally eliminate the half measure that was the ACA. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to need it. Medicare for all. It's time. Okay. Let's move on here. So Republicans have forced a vote on the Green New Deal in Congress. Now, the Green New Deal is right now an aspirational resolution with a couple of core goals that are yet to be fleshed out in complete detail. Nonetheless, Republicans wanted to treat this as a full piece of legislation and so have held a vote on it. Now, of course, basically it's all political trickery to try to get Democrats on the record as supporting this as they make up wild claims about it. Now, during deliberation, some of those claims that Republicans are making have been echoed by Senator Mike Lee, who took some time to point out why he thinks the Green New Deal is bad with hilarious results. Watch.
But that quibble actually serves our purposes here today, Mr. President, because this image has as much to do with overcoming communism in the 20th century as the Green New Deal has to do with overcoming climate change in the 21st. The aspirations of the proposal have been called radical. They've been called extreme. But mostly, they're ridiculous. There isn't a single serious idea here, not one. To illustrate, let me highlight two of the most prominent goals produced by the plan's authors. Goal number one, the Green New Deal calls essentially for the elimination of airplanes. Now, this might seem merely ambitious for politicians who represent the densely populated northeastern United States. But how is it supposed to work for our fellow citizens who don't live somewhere between Washington, D.C. and Boston? In a future without air travel, how are we supposed to get around the vast expanses of, say, Alaska during the winter? Well, I'll tell you how. Tauntauns, Mr. President, is a beloved species of reptomammals native to the ice planet of Hoth. Now, while perhaps not as efficient in some ways as airplanes or as snowmobiles, these hairy bipedal species of space lizards offer their own unique benefits. Not only are tauntauns carbon neutral, but according to a report a long time ago and issued far, far away, they may even be fully recyclable and usable for their warmth, especially on a cold night.
That was hilariously dumb. I mean, you saw other pictures included Ronald Reagan on a velociraptor shooting a gun, Aquaman riding a seahorse, so you could get around in Hawaii or around Hawaii, and a picture of babies saying that, oh no, the solution to climate change is to have more kids, and that the Green New Deal says you shouldn't have more kids. Are you serious? So let's get to the substance here for a second. So you heard him. Of the Green New Deal, core principles. One of them is to get rid of air travel, to ban airplanes. Really? Where is that in the resolution? Because there seems to be nothing in the Green New Deal resolution that bans air travel. It's ridiculous. It's a lie. They are literally making things up on the Senate floor. I mean, come on. Now, what the Green New Deal calls for is for overhauling transportation systems in the United States to remove pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector as much as is technologically feasible. Now, that includes investment in high-speed rail. Now, technologically feasible. Well, right now, we don't have a way to have airplanes not run on fossil fuels. We could, however, in the meantime, until we figure that out, make them more fuel efficient. That would make sense. That would make a lot of sense. Wow. I just figured that out, Mike Lee. How come you're not smart enough to figure that one out? And not only that, but across the continental United States, we could create a high-speed rail system that could reduce travel times. I mean, who wants to spend more time trying to get somewhere else? Seriously. There's room for improvement in our transportation sector. But conservatives like Mike Lee, well, they don't want that. They want more costly, slower transportation so that you spend more money on gas and so that, of course, oil companies profit more. Nonetheless, Republicans, as I said, they come up with the most ridiculous lies about the Green New Deal. Another one is they're going to ban cows. They're going to ban your hamburger. No, it's not in there at all. Absurd. Now, there was a screenshot from this hearing that went out on social media, and of course, it was widely mocked, as it should be. Waleed Shahid originally tweeted this out. Senator Mike Lee is on the Senate floor right now discussing AOC and Senator Markey's Green New Deal. These are not photoshopped, as a lot of people thought they might be. To which Lauren, Demonic Alien, responds, "Are you sure this isn't Photoshop? Because it really looks like it could be Photoshopped." No, it is not. William Lawrence says, "If we don't pass the Green New Deal, we'll end up in another ice age. The Republican Party will use their AR-15s and wave their flags from atop their dinosaur mounts. Aquaman will rule the rising seas as coastal cities are swallowed. Also, babies." Awesome. Blue Rant says, "Nothing is ever more embarrassing than when Republicans have to fill time. revealing that they know nothing and are appealing to others who know nothing, or anytime Mike Lee opens his mouth. Chow Almendra says, never thought Congress could out South Park. Love that. Because it's a true statement. It's something you would see on The Onion. Although The Onion's kind of like really got to stretch now at this point. Adam says, I haven't been this ashamed that he's my senator since he became my senator. I'd apologize to the rest of the country for this, but no, sorry, nothing could be said to make up for this. Xavier Pibb says, first they came for our guns and light bulbs, now they're coming for our burgers, cars, and Aquaman. John Adirola says, I've waited my whole life for The Empire Strikes Back to be recognized on the floor of Congress, and Senator Mike Lee had to come along and ruin it. I feel you, John. I do. As a Star Wars fan, I feel a little violated. Especially that gross misuse of the Tauntaun. Which, by the way, I mean, look, I thought they smelled bad on the outside. Just saying. Mark Hamill, by the way, said, please tell me this is Photoshop. Going back to that. Hashtag Congressional Tauntaun Pawn. And the worst guy says, if global warming is real, why is it snowing on Hoth? Counterpoint, libtards. Seriously, though, he may be the worst guy, but that's probably one of the best tweets. Bravo. More ridiculousness from Republicans serving donors. Okay. Now let's get to something serious on climate change. All right. There is bad news for the environment. According to the IEA, the amount of carbon emissions hit new record highs in 2018. Now, the report notes that energy-related CO2 emissions have risen by 1.7% to around 33.1 billion tons from the previous year. That's actually an incredibly high rate of growth, the most since the year 2013. Now, of course, what's to blame for that? Well, more use of fossil fuels across the world. In fact, the power sector accounted for almost 2/3 of this growth, according to estimates. Now, who leads that? The U.S., China, and India. In fact, according to the data, the U.S.'s CO2 emissions grew by 3.1% in 2018, which reversed, by the way, a decline a year earlier, while China's emissions rose 2.5% and India's by 4.5%. So let's compare that with Europe, right? So Europe is actually focusing heavily on renewable energy. Where did their emissions go? Well, it turns out Europe's emissions fell by 1.3%, and Japan's fell for the 5th year running. So that's great and very interesting. So now China and India, they are developing economies, right? So it makes sense that they are expanding their use of fossil fuels as they continue to industrialize. That makes sense, right? Now, Europe is not a developing, group of countries. They are quite developed, and they've been switching over to more alternative forms of energy, and so you've seen their carbon emissions footprint get reduced. Now, America kind of stands apart from all of those, since we are not a developing nation, but our emissions growth topped China. That's fascinating. You know what? We have no excuse. Now, the report also notes that when the IEA assessed the impact of fossil fuel use on the increase of global temperature, they found that CO2 emitted from coal consumption was responsible for over 0.3 degrees Celsius of the 1 degree rise in global average temperature since pre-industrial times, meaning that coal has had a large impact when it comes to temperature rise, right? And the increase in coal usage, going back to the last year, was driven by an increase in global energy demand. Now, that grew about 2.3% in 2018, nearly twice the average rate of growth since 2010, which has been driven by a strong economy and a higher heating and cooling demand in some parts of the world, according to the IEA. Demand for energy from renewable sources did also grow by about 4%, but the use of renewables needs to expand much more quickly to meet long-term climate goals, according to the report. Now, oil also grew, of course. Coal consumption was up 0.7%, as higher demand in Asia outpaced declines everywhere else. So in America, of course, coal is dying. It's a dying industry. But in Asia, and India especially, coal consumption is actually increasing because, as I said before, they are developing countries. Now, this, of course, is disastrous. According to Michael Mailing, Deputy Director at the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research at MIT, Monday's findings, he said, were, quote, very worrisome. To me, all this reflects is the fact that climate policies around the globe, despite some limited pockets of progress, remain woefully inadequate. Well, I agree with that 100%. He said they're not even robust enough to offset the increased emissions from economic expansion, especially in the developing world, let alone to spur decarbonization at levels commensurate with the temperature stabilization goals we've committed to under the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, look, the United States, thanks to Donald Trump, is not part of that agreement. And so, look, we've got less than 12 years to go carbon neutral across the world if we're to prevent climate change from getting worse. That's basically the point of no return, since then we start getting that feedback, right? And what do I mean by that is, look, the reason that we focus on Arctic ice, for example, is because of what Arctic ice does. It reflects sunlight. So it's a shiny surface that reflects the sunlight and prevents oceans from getting warmer. What happens is that due to climate change, the oceans are getting warmer anyway, and that starts to melt some of the ice. More ice melt means more of the sun's rays get absorbed by the oceans, and it warms the oceans, which increases ice melt, and it continues along this horrible cycle, right? And not only that, but as the air gets warmer, you also have melting permafrost, which is filled with a lot of carbon. So here you have a cycle that continues to get worse as more and more carbon gets released from trapped ice and from within trapped permafrost. We've got to avoid that. And so that's what the Paris Climate Agreement was set up to do, to avoid that 2 degrees warming. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to hit that. I mean, as we are going right now, it's unfortunate that we are burning even more fossil fuels when we should be doing the opposite and getting more renewable energy. And look, if we can avoid that, though, we can avoid the worst case scenarios of climate change if we act now. But we have to get all the countries, US, India, and China, to get on board. If we don't, we're not going to have enough time. And in order to do that, we do have to break the hold of fossil fuel industry on our government. And, of course, invest heavily in alternative renewable energies. And then, of course, not only do we have to take care of ourselves, but I think we also need to help India and China have more renewable energy as well. If we don't start working together, we're screwed. Because what we're doing right now is unsustainable. We've got to act, and we've got to act now. Because it turns out that our futures are at stake. Okay. Sorry to leave you out on that disappointing, disastrous, depressing note, but the news is what it is. All right. Thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for going around the nation with me today. Please like and share if you haven't already. Check out our clips later on as well. Very important that you guys watch those and help share those out. All right, guys. Thank you. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. We'll see you guys tomorrow. TYT is next.